podcast episode where I was in the power plant, and I tell this story about a power plant that's very active, and one day it just shuts down. Out of the middle of nowhere, it just shuts down. And the employees are running around, they're frantic with their heads cut off. And finally, the operations manager, after 3 hours, says, okay, we got to get some outside help. They call a local technician. Technician's like, you're lucky, I'm right around the corner. Technician shows up, and he surveys the power plant for about a few minutes. And there's full of beams everywhere. He goes to one specific beam, and on there's all these electrical boxes. He goes to one specific electrical box. He puts a big X with a magic marker on it. He opens it up, and there are all these bolts and wires and screws. He goes to one specific screw, and he turns it not a quarter of an inch, and all of a sudden the whole power plant lights up again. And the operations manager is like, thank you, you saved our business, you saved the day. How much do I owe you? He's like, that will be $10,000. And he's like, what? You were here for 5 minutes. All you did was turn a screw. He's like, how can you even justify that? She's like, give me an itemized bill. He's like, no problem. Technician reaches in his back pocket, takes out a piece of paper, scribbles on it, tears off the sheet, gives it to him. And he's like, oh, I understand. He goes to his desk, writes a check for $10,000, hands it to the man. And he basically, and you look at the invoice, if you will, and it says, turning screw, $1. Knowing what screw to turn, $9,999. And the lesson is, for people who are listening, is not that you have a screw loose, is that little things can make a big difference.
And I've only been in this for about a year. It's been a learning process, but I think, like I said, it's a great opportunity as a diversification in citrus or other crops. I'm going to share with you kind of my observations. One thing that we're trying to identify is the species that's suitable for our climate and soil. Right now we know asper is probably the main one, but we believe there's others. But the most important thing we have to identify is if they meet the specs of what BAMCOR has to have. So like he said, there's 1,200 varieties of bamboo, and obviously there's only just a few, maybe 30, that can be used for what the purposes we need it for. And in Florida, it might only be 4 or 5. But we're identifying it. But we do have one we know works, and that's the asper. We already discussed about the markets. Something we haven't talked about, and that's what Vince Davis here as well, is if you looked in the back, there is some samples of some jars of the edible shoots, and they have a USDA label. It's only shoots that's in the U.S. that's got a label for USDA, FDA approved. So you see them in the back there. That's the wood products. That's the BAMCOR's department. I think the most important thing to remember, this is asper. That's the runners varieties, like the Mozo variety. That's the heart of this whole plant, is the rhizome. And that part of the plant has got to be protected, and that's what makes more plants. So as the rhizome grows and makes another shoot, we can actually sever this here and divide the root into making, and when this gets to maturity levels, that's a big problem if some people have done in the past is, and some of you probably got some of those plants, they weren't mature at the time this shoot wasn't when you got the plants. And when you root divide these, it takes at least 6 or 8 weeks for it to heal before it can be planted out in the field. It takes time, and some people don't have patience, including myself sometimes. Here's some asper. This is a collection that's down in Loxahatchee, and they're pretty large. These are like 7 or 8 year old plants. That's the shoot part of it. It's got the sheath around it, and it's sold to 2 markets. There's a fresh and a processed market. The fresh, these are not peeled. Processed market, they are. That's what's in the jars is the processed market. But that's the size of cones we're talking about. That's going to meet near BAMCOR specs. I'm going to go over some varieties that I think we're looking into. I'm not telling you this is the actual thing, but there's other varieties that can grow in our climate. And I'm going to kind of flip through this because remember I said asper we know is written in stone that we can use, but the latiflorus seems to be one that has some potential. And it's a clumper, and it makes a pretty good size. And all this material we'll have available to all of you. This is a Brandisi. Don't really know a whole lot about it. It does have sizable cones, and it grows in a subtropical climate. This is Hamiltonia. This is Gigantus. Of course, this is a real big one. That's why it says giant. The Strictus, that's valuable in India for paper product. Maybe one day when there's a large amount of acreage planted in Florida, it can also be utilized for the pulp. This is Beachiana. It's another large cone, subtropical, that we're looking into seeing if it'll grow. Old Hamii, that's probably the variety a lot of us see. It's planted in Florida. That's something that was brought in, no telling how long ago, but it's well established. This Angustifolia, that makes a very large This is what Godia that they use South America and Mexico. This is a key point we found the hard way, and this is tissue culture. So now we're getting scientific. I've got a brain trust, Beth Lamb. She developed all this technology. She does all her tissue culture for citrus and other crops. And when we first got into this, it's illegal and it's prohibited to bring seed imported from Asia. There's like an 80-year quarantine on it because it carries viruses that's detrimental to our grain crops in the United States. So the USDA wants to protect the grain industry, which we're not nowhere near that size. So the big dog gets protected first. Beth's been working on this for about 6 or 7 months, and she found the right solution for these to grow in. And then you'll see those little divisions. These are all little divisions, and we'll step them up into these little containers. It's a little GrowTech plug. Then as they progress, we grade them out. We get all the strong ones, and we step them up into these 1-gallon containers. And that's what you see there is kind of what it result after about probably 5 or 6 months. But they have to be trained and graded. Nothing's 100%, even in our business. So that's the most important thing, is getting good, healthy, established plants from the nursery. That's what's important. This is our citrus container, just to show you kind of what it would look like if it was in a citrus container. And they can grow in that one as well. Tips on planting bamboo. This is a big sticking point, even with citrus. They even got a couple tree planters here in the room. They'll back me up, I hope. The most important thing is when you take and this is pretty much the same information we have for planting a citrus tree. And a lot of it's just common sense. When you bring them in, don't set them out in the middle of the field, let them sit there for several days in the hot sun, especially July or August, because that black container absorbs a lot of heat and it'll scald those roots, especially if they're laying down. That's what I put in here about not going too far ahead of when the planter plants, they pre-drill the holes. They go out and put the plants ahead of time. If they take a lunch break and you've got 100 containers sitting out in the field for 30 minutes or an hour, they're finished, especially in the middle of the summer, because those roots will get scalded and they won't die immediately. They'll die about 2 weeks later. And that's when they call a nurseryman and tell them they got problems with the plants. Always dig the hole the same size the container is. Don't plant it too deep. Don't plant it not enough. You don't want to see a bunch of roots sticking out of the ground either. So, and just for the transition to acclimate the plant, I always advise on any type of plant is knock half the potting media off the plant, because you're trying to acclimate that plant into that new environment, that new soil you're putting it in. So it makes a smoother transition, a lot less transplanting shock. People get in a hurry, they dig the hole, don't even add water to the hole. It's important to add the water to the hole to help get the air pockets out when you're mudding it in, we call it, and get that backfill dirt, pull it in, mix it in with the water and the root system where we got half that media taken off. And don't sit there and start kicking it off like a wild man. Just give it one good hit, break that root ball off the bottom and set it in the hole. These are some containers we tried. We're trying to identify what containers work best. This is a smaller container. It stresses the plant to where it actually makes shoots quicker, because the plant can sense it's in too small of a pot, so it goes into the stress mode. But you can go too small. So you got to have a certain amount of root development and substance for that thing to take off out in the field, because it's not in the greenhouse any longer. So it's not going to get the same care it had in the nursery that is out in the field. Sites, real important. There's a myth that bamboo can be planted in swamps and where you got water, but that's a myth. It's not true. They have to breathe too. This is a field in Hardee County. This is a site he's got ready to plant. That's some he has planted that were just not very old. I think they were a few months old, and look what's already taken it over, this grass. So if you go into something like glyphosate, you're really taking a big chance. So it's very careful about the application of the herbicide you use and where you put it at. The zones, we're still working through this. Ormiston's here to help me on this, but at first we were talking about the 9B area, but there's been some talk that, hey, we're in global warming, maybe we can go on up into the 9A area, which goes, this little finger goes up to Jacksonville, because you got the St. Johns River here. So the east, we might maybe get some beneficial from the warmth of the ocean or the St. Johns River, but not all of these areas here. There's what we call cold pockets. We call trough areas, where when you get a freeze that comes down, it'll settle in some of these little fingers. And people all the time say, well, I'm in 9B, there's no way in hell this thing ought to have any freeze damage. Well, there is, because this is textbook, And textbook and field reality, there's a difference sometimes. So the point I'm trying to make is you probably know your property better than anybody, or your father does, or your grandfather does. So you know what areas are cold pockets on that property. Don't put the bamboo in them pockets because they're going to really struggle. And all it takes is one hard night freeze and it's going to burn all the cones back. So 9B is right now the preferable position. Yes, there could be some places up in 9A, maybe on the coast. First talked to Hal, he started out telling me he needed about 50,000 acres. And then before he left, he was talking about 100,000 acres. Of course, this is over several years' time, but there's a lot of opportunities in this area. So we got a lot of plants to grow and a lot of ground to plant. Any questions?